You're listening to Coming of Cage, a Nicolas Cage podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to Coming of Cage, a Nicolas Cage film review podcast. I am one of your two hosts, Derek, and I've got my buddy Ryan right here with me.
I thought we were more than buddies.
Oh, we are so much more than buddies.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, buddy, old pal.
Hi. That was enthusiastic.
It was. Well, we have kind of an interesting movie to talk about this week. So if you don't know the show, each episode we discuss a Nicolas Cage movie that came up on our Wheel O' Cage the week before. And this time we are talking about the 1991 erotic drama Zandalee, starring Nicolas Cage, Judge Reinhold, and Erika Anderson, as well as a few more notable people popping up, directed by Sam Pillsbury. The kind of general synopsis of the movie, which really doesn't paint a great picture of it, but no pun intended. Theory's wife Zandalee married the poet he once was. Taking over his dad's company in New Orleans gives him stress and impotence. Theory meets his high school buddy Johnny at a bachelor party. The painter Johnny can satisfy Zandalee. So there you go. I mean,
that seems like it was written by somebody that didn't speak English and then translated into English.
I mean, I don't know, man. It does not really encapsulate this movie. So this movie is rated R, big time, but Ryan and I happen to catch the unrated version of the film, which was released on DVD later in 2001-ish. Kind of difficult to get your hands on, but it is out there. So we figured, why not? Let's go all in and watch the original NC-17 cut, I guess, of this movie. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. If you haven't seen it, the rated R version is available on streaming, but not the unrated version. So Ryan, take us away.
Okay, so how we usually do this is that I like to take notes throughout the movie, and it lets us kind of discuss the movie in a chronological order as to, how they happen in the movie. So, yeah. My first note is that Steve Buscemi and Marisa Tomei are like 10th billing, which is interesting, in the opening credits.
Yeah, it's because their roles are fairly small.
Yeah, it's such a weird, this must have been before either of them really got big because they were completely wasted in this movie. They were fine, but it was just a weird seeing what I would consider big name actors to be way behind actors that are not anyone I know about.
Yeah, I mean, Marisa Tomei was in a few things prior to this. Her first work started in 1984, so she'd been in the industry for a little while, but certainly not.
She had basically one scene in this, and that was it.
She literally had one scene, which we'll talk about at some point. Buscemi's kind of in the same boat. He started in 85, so both of them had been around for several years and been in certainly a collection of projects before this.
Buscemi's character didn't even get a name in this, so that shows you how tiny his role is.
Yeah, he's credited as OPP man.
Yeah,
he's a prisoner.
So then we get like a long, boring opening credits that's just like names.
Black screen,
white names, nothing interesting about it.
They couldn't even do B-roll of the city.
Yeah, and then literally the movie opens with a pan through some of the city into boobs and bush right away.
Full frontal nudity almost immediately.
Yeah, within the first minute of the movie.
And
of the actual movie past the credits.
Right. And this is one of two scenes where a person or people are dancing and it's unclear if they also hear music. Or if they're dancing.
They're dancing to the soundtrack that we're hearing, but It's unclear whether that's actually happening in the movie. Although we can talk about it more, but I feel like based on some of the shots in this movie, that maybe an argument could be made that literally someone was in the context of the movie just following these people through certain situations with the camera, not just like the cameraman being an external thing, because there's certain scenes where they didn't even try to hide and make it look like it was a, smooth motion, and it was like shaky, like somebody's walking with them or like riding in a vehicle behind them, or something like that.
That's fair.
My next note is he wearing a fez?
I'm gonna say yes
Yes,
without
he
being an
was.
expert on the hat. I'm gonna say yes.
It was very weird. So we get introduced to this character,
And this is
his
Judge Reinhold's character.
yes, and I guess he has a name, but I don't remember them ever actually using that name.
It's Theory.
Yeah, I don't remember that name being used much. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention that closely, or maybe I thought they were saying something else. It's a
I thought
weird
they were
name.
saying Terry,
Oh, okay.
but it's Theory.
We get introduced to his character, and Zandalee. Her name was pronounced multiple ways throughout this movie, so it was extra confusing.
I think it's Zandalee because her nickname is Zan. So I think
Yeah,
it's Zandalee.
but well, it's the end that's really the confusing part. Zandalee. I mean, depending on
Yeah.
which character in the movie is saying it, it's different. So, but yeah, we get introduced to them, and he quickly puts on a fez and is headed to a bachelor party where fezzes and cigars and strippers are a thing.
So, okay, I wasn't sure what that event was. I was hoping that it was a bachelor party and not like a work event, but that
It
was
would be
very
an odd work
unclear.
event even in like the 80s or 90s.
I agree. It was just unclear to me what was happening because like
Yeah,
you
they didn't
never.
really make it. They didn't make it super clear. I mean, I think you're just supposed to assume it was a bachelor party based on the context.
But who's the groom?
I
We
mean,
never see a wedding either.
it's
So
unclear, but I mean, that's the whole like. There was a lot of that crap in this movie, so let's just get real. Like, there's a
uh,
lot of like stuff that has no context. But this is where Johnny Collins comes in,
Nick
and
Cage.
uh, okay, actually, we just before this party, before we get into that, we get sexy moist Buscemi
So
in
yeah,
his
so
prison outfit in the
yes,
rain, looking very young and handsome.
very young. Yeah, so apparently, yeah, he's a prisoner who I guess is on some type of work program, and Zandalee likes to jog through the city. This whole thing takes place in New Orleans, and so they bump into each other multiple times. I think three or four times throughout the movie, and he's kind of pseudo hitting on her, but kind of playfully. I don't know.
Also, it's established in this moment that she does not own a bra because when she jogs through the city, she's literally throughout this movie, she never wears a bra. So, I mean, that was not from me noticing that. That was from my significant other that I was watching this with. Made the comment of, does she even own a bra? Like 3/4 of the way through the movie. So if that's what you're into, then hey, you get a lot of that type of thing in this movie.
I
This is just
mean,
scratching the surface.
there is so much nudity in this movie.
Mostly from like one person.
Mostly, but I mean, like the bachelor party, there's a
There's a
lot
lot of
of
boobs and like
basically
really
naked women.
like I mean, at certain times it felt like straight up porn because like
Yes.
it's really close up like nipples and like, very odd
I mean,
thing.
there's a shot in the bachelor party scene right before the moment before we see Nick Cage's introduction where a dude has nipple in his mouth that
Yes,
is in the shot,
licking whipped cream off of nipple.
you know.
Um,
So like,
yeah, I'm
yeah,
guessing that's one of the shots that was probably not in the R-rated version.
I
That seems
mean,
a little gratuitous for R-rated movie.
it does. But then we also like the way it's basically the way Johnny Collins, Nick Cage's character, is introduced in the movie. So like, I just
Well,
don't
they
even know how you.
could. I'm not saying they cut out the whole Bachelor scene. I'm just
Right.
talking about that specific like nipple lick.
I would be curious just to know how they handle a scene like that in the R-rated version.
Also, there's a lot of bush in this movie too, which is fine. I'm not judging the character's choice of pubic hair, but like you don't see that even a lot in an R-rated movie.
Well, that's the thing. Like basically almost every time there's a naked woman, she's completely naked with like full frontal nudity. So I'm
Yes.
wondering, like was that was just maybe enough? I don't know.
There and on the contrary side to that, there's almost there's zero, I don't think, full frontal male nudity.
I don't think you see any penis.
There's a lot of butt, and we'll get to it later in my notes. I'm pretty sure we got to see a little slip of Nick Cage testicle at one point.
If we did, I missed it. But
well, you definitely. I mean, I'm pretty sure I saw it.
But there's a really long scene later where Judge Reinhold's character is completely naked, but it's shot very purposefully, so you never see any penis.
Right. Which seems a little sexist, but this was the early 90s, right?
Well, especially because like this is the NC-17 version. You already are getting that rating. You might as well go with it.
Yeah, but I'm guessing they just assumed that nobody wanted to see that, which couldn't be more wrong. Okay, so yeah, we get Sexy Moist Buscemi, and then we get Nick Cage's Johnny Collins intro in this movie. And so I'm curious, Derek, when he's walking in, he does something very specific and there was a couple of times in this movie that I noticed that he does something that is also done in a later movie of his that's more popular. That this seems like a trial run on those things, maybe, or maybe it's a habit that Nick Cage had and always wanted to try, and then he uses it in a more popular movie later, maybe because he doesn't think it gets its due. I'm curious if you know what I'm talking about, the moment.
I'm not sure that I do.
Okay, so when he walks in, the first time we see him, it's in like a dark hallway.
Yes.
And he like ducks down and does like this head swinging thing.
Yeah, it's like a silhouette of him.
Right. He also does that in Face Off.
Does he?
I'm pretty sure it's when he's walking out as like the priest.
Oh,
and they're
right.
singing, and he like walks out and does that same head thing.
Yeah.
It's incredibly similar.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But that's not the only one. That's the only one I remember off the top of my head. But I remember seeing something else later. It was like, that's from another movie of his too. It's just interesting seeing that.
He's got some mannerisms. He's got some things that he just does, I think. Right. But his introduction is super weird though, because we get this silhouette shot of him in the hallway. It's a very harsh cut.
It's a hell of a Cage intro too. It's one of his best intros so far into any movie we've watched of his.
It is very good. And then he's just in the bachelor party.
Like weird early 90s goatee and strange, weird mullet. I want to call it a mullet because I think technically it is, but it's a weird thing he's got going on there.
The facial hair in this movie is really special because Judge Reinhold's got this mustache that he wears throughout the whole movie. And Cage has his little, I guess, goatee. It was a choice. It was a choice.
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was a choice. There's like a singer that I'm familiar with from the 90s that had a very similar facial hair, but I can't remember who it was. But anyway, it's not that important. But yes, it's the weirdest facial hair we've had so far, I think, for Nick Cage. Yeah, and I don't foresee that being topped anytime soon. No. My next note is belt buckle, because he had this really extravagant, like colored belt buckle. I don't even know what was on it, to be honest. It was just really big, like not comically big, like you see the jokes about Texas belt buckles, but for the early 90s, a very out of place, like large belt buckle.
Yeah, I didn't notice the belt buckle. I think I was distracted by some of the other stuff in the scene.
He wore a really nice, like, crushed velvet blazer, and he wears that for a few scenes in the movie.
But no fez. No fez.
No fez. Yeah, he's the only one and the only male at this bachelor party with no fez. My next note is bad hair extensions. So when we see him, there's some shots from the back where he has like this mullet thing going on, and it literally, like, when you look at the back of his hair, I feel like this wasn't ever meant to be seen in high def, because and we didn't watch it in that high def. I feel like it was like 720p or something. Like it was not like
this is not a Blu-ray. Yeah.
No. But you could see like a split in his hair where they like clipped in extensions. And if you're familiar with hair at all, you should not be able to like see the transition for that kind of thing. So there's one of many things on this movie that definitely showed their lack of budget and where they were cutting it in specific things.
Man, I'm really concerned now that this movie was so bizarre and uncomfortable at times that I might have missed some of those details because I was just like stunned.
I think you did. Yeah, I think you did.
What was going on?
Donald Trump is my next note.
Yeah, that's a name drop. They probably
He's talking about random, like, he's saying something about rich people, and Donald Trump is the only person he name drops. Like, it was the
yeah.
only rich person that the writer for this movie could think of at the time.
And like not and to my memory, I don't really think much happened between him and New Orleans. So it just doesn't seem like
No,
the most
it was a
in
weird,
context name drop. But what are you gonna do?
right. And so just after this, I think they come back to like their house or apartment or whatever it is drunk.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this is the first time that Zandalee, am I saying that right? I don't know if
Zandalee, yeah.
yeah, I still don't, I'm never gonna probably get it completely right. But it's the first time that she meets Johnny Collins, Nick Cage's character. She's
Yes,
married to Judge Reinhold's character.
yes.
But and this is his best friend from like childhood, but somehow she's never met him.
Right. They grew
Um,
up in the bayou.
yeah, his that southern accent, Judge Reinhold's southern accent was not great, by the way. Like I applaud him for trying, but probably never again. Anyway, throughout this whole scene, she seemed like she absolutely hated Johnny Collins. Like she was like if looks could kill, then he would have been dead multiple times over. Like she couldn't wait to get away from him.
So it's interesting because no matter the scene, I felt like she hated him the whole time.
Yes.
And that might have been some personal stuff going through because there's an interview with her about how one of the first scenes that they filmed happens to be one of the most sexually intense scenes, and it was very uncomfortable for her and she had a really bad time with it. And so that maybe that played into it, that she was just done. And it was between, her and Nick Cage, of course. And so maybe she was just done with him and done with the movie at that point. I don't know. But there was no point in this movie where I looked at her and thought she likes this guy.
Yeah, there was basically no chemistry between the two of them, and we'll get into it later, but there's some like things that seemed like questionable consent, like majorly questionable consent.
Oh, yes.
But I don't think it was supposed to be questionable in the context of the movie. That was
That's the
what was
problem.
awkward.
That's the problem. I don't know. I walked out of this movie not understanding if this was supposed to be a consensual relationship or not. There are several times where it certainly doesn't look that way.
Right, but then the way she acts goes like contradicts that.
It's
And
very
I feel like
weird.
yeah, we can get into more of that when we get into it, but I feel like there was definitely the thing you're talking about with the issues on set may have actually been a lot of what I was seeing. I wasn't aware of that. So at this point, it shows her the next day working in her clothing shop
Mm-hmm.
with a customer who's advising her on her sex life. It's
Yeah.
unclear as to whether she like makes this clothing or it's just like a distributor or like just works for somebody else at their clothing store. It's definitely implied that it's hers because she's the only one we ever see working there.
Right. Yeah. You see well, is so Theory, is that his mom or his grandma that
I
lives
don't
with
really
them?
know. It's
Okay.
unclear.
So I think she might be working there too. There's a couple of scenes where she's in the shop too. But
Okay.
this is the customer is Joe Pantoliano. Joey Pants, I guess, is what a lot of his co-stars and friends call him. I really only know him from the Bad Boys movies. That's
Yeah,
my
he's been in a lot of stuff. He's not someone that like you would know his name necessarily, but you would definitely recognize his face.
yeah, exactly. And
Supporting
his
actor in a
voice.
lot of movies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
it is
very
voice,
distinct
that's true.
voice. Yeah.
Yeah, so we see this scene where he tells her he's cross-dresser, I think is implied.
I mean,
I I
he's
don't
definitely
know.
wearing feminine clothing in every scene he's in.
Yes. So that's as much as we know about him. It's not really implied or it's not really clear how deep into that lifestyle he
There,
goes.
there's a couple of lines that he says that certainly implies that he has sex with men. That doesn't mean that he's necessarily, homosexual. We don't know that, but he does make references to sex with men.
Sure.
So,
So we get that scene, which is kind of a weird scene. And then it goes to a scene where John Reinhold's character and Zandalee are in the bedroom, and of course her boobs are out again. Um, and they're talking about him quitting his writing career. It's kind of establishing that whole thing where
Hmm.
he's quit this career to pursue this career in his dad's business, I think. I
Yeah.
honestly am really, really unclear about the plot in this movie, mostly because nothing in it makes sense.
So
Um,
this part's not overly complicated. I just don't think it was explained very well. But basically, so he was a poet and a professor. And then about a year ago, his dad died. And when his dad died, he felt this obligation to save his dad's business, which was this communications company, Southern Com and Southcom, and he takes that over. But in that process, he no longer writes poetry, and he's become impotent and very miserable and depressed and these other things. And that is where about a year into that is where we're introduced to all of these characters.
yeah, and in this scene, I think they try to have sex, but he can't do it. And
Correct.
so she's talking about him quitting writing, and it's just a really poorly acted scene. It stood out to me as like, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say poorly. I don't really know how to describe it. It's kind of like they didn't think it was bad, but like you appreciate how bad it is, if that makes any sense. Like Evil Dead or Army of Darkness, right? They're taking it very seriously, but it's your enjoyment comes from the fact of how bad it is. I can kind of make a comparison to this in a lot of ways. That we did read some reviews last week before me and you shared because we had never heard of this movie and we wanted to see what we were in for. And some people shared it as like a better like Vampire's Kiss quality level. And we haven't watched Vampire's Kiss yet, so I can't really make that comparison. But it made it seem like it's kind of a cult classic for how bad it is that people love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Everything in this movie felt off. Like it felt like, you know how in movies they do multiple takes of a scene? It was like
Yeah.
they did multiple takes and they just took the worst takes and put them all together. So it felt disjointed and awkward and strange throughout the entire movie. There's no point in the movie where anything feels smooth or together or comfortable at really any point.
You know
And I
what I
mean,
think? You know what I think this is? Like what a better way to describe it, and you just kind of made me think about it. I feel like it felt like I was watching a stage production where
interesting.
like they just had one take and they just went with that take every time. You don't get to redo it during a stage production or theater production.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of what it felt like to me. And so like whether it was good or whether it was bad, that's what you got as a viewer.
I think that's fair. And it's scored kind of low. Like Rotten Tomatoes, it's a 33% from critics and a 29% from the audience. On IMDb, it's sitting at a 4.3. So like, it's not good, but it's certainly not the worst rated movie I've watched. But boy, this was
Yeah, it was something. And that's particular scenes kind of stood out to me as one where I was like, man, like I'm enjoying how bad this is, but like I feel kind of bad for thinking it's bad because I can tell they're really trying.
I did not enjoy any of the movie. I was
Okay, fair
really
enough.
like I was just uncomfortable is not the right word, but just I never settled in at any point while watching this.
So right after this, we get a random scene of Zandalee in a church,
Hmm.
which at this point, it seems like way out of context. It doesn't have any clear relation to anything else that's happened so far in the movie. She's never mentioned being religious, mentioned God, or anything along those lines.
No, but she's clearly deeply religious because she goes
Deeply
back.
religious.
Yeah.
It does pay off later in the movie. But yeah, at this point, it's literally like a 30 or 40-second scene of her just like walking in the church and sitting in one of the pews. Is that the right term for
That
that?
is the right term.
And just kind of staring at the crucifix for 8 seconds or whatever, and then it cuts to the next scene. Then we get the shaky cam strip club scene.
Yeah, she goes back and sees Joey, who I guess his character's name is Jerry, I guess. But they go to this strip club bar thing.
Party? Yeah, it's like seems like a party. I don't really know what it is. It's not really a strip club. I mean, there is stripping, but it's more like a sex club, I guess, because there are people just like randomly having sex.
Yeah, it was kind of wild. And then she
Yeah.
just randomly kisses somebody.
Yeah, and it's never touched on again,
Nope.
really. Yeah, it was a weird scene. And the person that she kisses is not like, an argument could be made that Judge Reinhold, maybe he's not your type specifically, but he's an attractive man, and Johnny Collins is an attractive man, and Steve Buscemi, attractive man. But this person that she kisses in the sex club scene is not necessarily someone that would be considered conventionally attractive like any of those guys would. So it was a very weird scene,
And
just in
it never
general.
comes back. We don't see that guy before that or after that. So
Yeah, or get his name or anything at all.
right.
But then we get the drunk Zandalee heading back to her home,
Hmm.
whatever it is, and we get one of the most awkward scenes I've ever seen, where they try and have sex. Right? Is this
Hmm.
the scene? I wrote down awkward sex scene, so I think this is the one where they try and have sex, and he like can't get it up, and so they start talking, and then while he's like having a deep conversation, she like starts to masturbate on the bed and
Hmm.
cry
Hmm.
at the same time. And like, I'm not trying to kink shame or anything,
No, well,
so if that's what you're into, then
she's really upset, right? And she's trying to get him into it, and then he gets mad at her for it. And then isn't that the scene where they also find the lizard?
let me look at my next note.
Because there's a scene like that where he's completely naked
Oh yeah, okay.
and they find a lizard.
So first they try and have sex, like normal sex, which is really awkward. And then she's like missionary sex, I should say, not like normal sex, because that's a different definition for everybody. But then they say something about explorer. She says something about explorers and flips around and like puts her butt up against him. And I'm like, the only thing I can think of is that maybe they're talking about like anal. It's not. It's a very weird
I
scene. Like
think
she's
she's
trying
just
to get him
trying
to
to get
do.
him into it, and it's
Uh,
just awkward for them.
Yes, and then he walks away and she's staring at him and crying while masturbating. And he's like walking around the room naked
Hmm.
and a lizard. I think Zandalee points to a lizard. It says lizard. And he like, huh? And he like reaches down and grabs this lizard that apparently they used a real lizard because it looked like it jumped out of his hand.
I want to know if that was in the script or if there was just a lizard on the set and they went with it.
I don't know, but that was probably my favorite part of the whole movie. Just this random lizard in this otherwise miserable to watch scene.
Yeah, I can't imagine that was in the script. That felt so out of place and so weird.
Right. So then we get the scene where she's running again, another running
Hmm.
scene. There's like six of these.
Yep.
Um, this one, she's like running through a train yard, or she's like running up to a train yard, and there's a train coming. And the way it's showing it, it's almost like trying to make you think that she's going to jump in front of the train. It's a very weird scene. My
Well,
note says,
she's gonna. I
were
mean,
we supposed to think she was going to suicide by train?
I thought that she was like at this point just trying to feel alive, right? And so she wasn't gonna like her goal wasn't to die, right? But she's throwing caution to the wind. She doesn't really care about the consequences. She just wants to feel the adrenaline of trying to get past the train without it actually hitting her. You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I took it. Like, the people who start doing the daredevil type stuff, just to feel the rush because everything else is numb for them.
Yeah. Again, it was another weird scene that I didn't feel like there was very much context for, but it was there. And then I guess she runs into uh, Johnny. I just watched this last night. I've already forgotten like the sequence of events,
Because
but
there's no real like continuity to anything. There's no story.
yeah,
Like the story is so basic, it is hard to remember the order of things because they don't lead into each other. It's just like I forget who says this, but there's theory about how to write story, especially like television and film. And it's not supposed to be this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's supposed to be this happens, so this happens, so this happens. This movie's not like that. This movie is like the former, where it's just like a series of events occur and I guess they're in sequential order. But if you were to move them around, you probably wouldn't notice.
That's true. So I get he's wearing like his work outfit or work uniform, which apparently he works uh
Yeah, so the reason that
for
he's
Judge
at the
Reinhold.
bachelor party is because he's back in town and he's now working for Thery's dad's company because he's actually a painter. Johnny is a painter, but he's got to pay the bills, even though I guess he owes money to somebody because that comes back later. So that's unclear where his money is going. But I guess drugs because cocaine shows up at one
That's
point.
true.
Kind of out of the blue, the cocaine
Yeah,
shows
like
up.
3/4 of the way through the movie.
Like all of a sudden he's on cocaine. Oh my God.
Yeah, but he shows up and like I don't remember what he was doing in the scene, but he's wearing his work uniform. So maybe coming off of work. And she asks about his tattoo and he just like casually flexes his arm and has this tattoo that clearly looks like a temporary tattoo in the middle of his arm, which maybe works out because he does offer to give her one, so maybe he just drew it on.
But it's on him for like the rest of the movie though.
Yeah, it is. And then I put no one can resist the cage because I think they make out at this point.
Does he kiss her then?
I think so.
God, it's so confused. But she's so mad at him and like standoffish. It's just so confusing to me.
And then we get another scene where like I don't even remember where she was going, but it was raining and he just like gets out of a cab in the rain where she's at. And so my next note was he just waiting in a cab for her?
Unless it was his car. I guess we don't really know.
But either way, like he's just waiting out on the street for her. That's kind of horribly creepy.
Absolutely. That's the thing.
Then we get a moist Cage to go with our moist Buscemi that we had earlier in the movie. We get most of the leads at some point are moist in this movie. Most of the male leads.
I guess everybody is really by the end.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. That's a spoiler without being a spoiler, but yeah. And this is when he utters probably the best line in the movie. Do you remember the line, Derek?
I'm wondering which one you're talking about. I don't know.
He says he wants to shake her naked and eat her alive. He says, I want to shake you naked and eat you alive. And it's unclear what that means. If he's literally talking about like shaking her naked and then eating her, or like if it's a sex thing. It's based on the context of the movie. I would assume it's a sex thing rather than a murdery thing, although there is some of that in the movie too.
It's just so uncomfortable, man. Like, okay, let me ask this. Are we supposed to believe that Zandalee is so incredibly desperate for physical love that she'll just take it from anybody who will give it to her, no matter how poorly?
This isn't just anybody. This is Nick Cage in one of his peak looks.
But she also like hates him the entire time.
The actress looks like she hates him, but
Erika
I don't
Anderson,
think the character is supposed to hate him.
I mean, that's the problem though, right? Because Erika Anderson's performance is the character. And so it just comes off to me like she despises this guy in basically every scene. Even when they're having sex, she doesn't seem happy about it.
Yeah, it's very weird. Yeah, I mean, my next note is rapey vibes because it seems like he just like forces himself onto her at this point, but then she like starts grabbing his junk, I think, at this point and like fondling it.
This is the scene where she takes her underwear off in the middle of
that's right. Rain, he says he likes it when they doesn't wear anything underneath. And so she immediately takes her underwear off. So then my next note was appears consensual.
Right? Like, is it consensual and he's just kind of aggressive and she likes that? Or is it not consensual and she feels obligated? Like, it's just also awkward that I don't know what the message is supposed to be.
Yeah.
In of itself is a problem.
Yeah. It's a weird thing. And then we get like this really odd, probably the most explicit Nick Cage sex scene that we've had so far in any of the movies that we watched.
Yeah.
Where he's just like humping away. They're
back at his gallery, I guess, or his studio where he
is very aggressive.
Very.
That's fine. I mean, if that's the way you guys do it, if in the context of the movie, it seemed like it added to that level of like does she hate him? Like, is this a hate fuck or what is this? You know?
That's the problem. The problem is I don't know the connotation,
Yeah,
and
it
it's just
was,
never clear.
yeah, yeah, it was odd. And then my next one is clairvoyance of the eyes. I think he says something like that to her, and it's supposed to sound deep, but really it doesn't mean anything. And there's several lines like that, just like that shake you naked or whatever, shake you and eat you naked or whatever it was. Yeah, shake you naked and eat you alive. Like, what does that even mean? These things are just meant to sound sexy or smart, and they just it's like it's like you gave an AI some like a bunch of sexy things to read, and then you came up with something like this. It doesn't make any sense, but sounds kind of sexy. I don't know.
There are a lot of very strange lines in this
Yeah,
movie. Yeah, it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to hide the clairvoyance of the eyes. That's the line.
yeah. But what does that even mean?
I don't
It means
know.
nothing. It's gibberish. So then the next scene we get is her like laying naked in bed and him like painting on her body. And
Yeah,
maybe I'm alone in this. Did you get Armageddon vibes from this?
I mean, I do
Like
now.
the movie where, so if you've seen Armageddon, the classic Michael Bay, Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck film, there's a scene where like Ben Affleck's character is getting ready to go to space,
Like you do.
and like you do, and he's spending this last day with his wife or girlfriend.
I think they're
They're
engaged
engaged.
at this
That's
point.
right.
Liv Tyler.
Liv Tyler. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. I love that actress. I just couldn't remember her name
I
for
love
whatever reason.
Armageddon.
Okay, I do too, unapologetically. But
Yeah.
then there's a scene where like they take like the animal cracker and it's
Yeah,
like
it's so great.
moving, but it's a really up close shot of like Liv Tyler's body, and
Yeah.
like you can see like all the tiny hairs and everything like that on her body, and it's like
It's
"Take My
a
Breath
but
Away," I think is the song playing or something like that. At least at
it's a
some point.
cute romantic scene. Like I feel like these two
Yes.
scenes are the antithesis of each other.
They are, but they had similar vibes to me. Like in the context of the movie, they're very different. But like in the scene, I don't know. I had very similar vibes where because it's very close up shot of her
Yeah.
body. You're seeing like every little thing on imperfection on her body. And another person sensually touching the body while you're seeing it.
And I think this is a good example, though, of how disjointed this movie is, because you're right. The scenes are extremely similar. The difference is in Armageddon, I see a couple that loves each other and they're trying to be cute and romantic and sweet. And in Zandalee, I see these two people and it's just uncomfortable and strange.
Yeah, yeah. Apparently, they were supposed to use, or they originally were going to use red paint in this scene.
Yes.
And because it came across too aggressive with like the really aggressive fucking that they had right before this, they they changed it to blue paint to show a more tender side, which is what that scene in Armageddon was too. It was a more tender like scene out of the movie because the rest of the movie there's some aggressive and things that happen, but it worked in Armageddon. It did not work here.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's the main difference.
I don't think it worked.
Then we get a scene of Nick Cage at the bar, and I think this is actually where we get the first kind of cocaine thing happening. Although I don't think we know it's cocaine at this point. It's just like a package that somebody left for him.
Right. Yeah.
But then he does some bar magic randomly. This guy is also a magician
With a priest. There's a
with
priest,
a priest who's
who knows
there.
Johnny because he calls him by name.
Yeah.
So this is at the bar that I guess Johnny just hangs out in.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was my next. That was bar magic.
Bar magic.
And then he is a really bad friend. I don't know what exactly happened at this point that made me say that, but he is a really bad friend in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, he's horrible. So,
and honestly, Judge Reinhold's character is a decent guy. Like, I feel bad for him.
He's
he
going
didn't
through a
do
tough
anything.
thing.
Yeah, he didn't do anything in this movie I would be like, that's a dickhead. He seems like a real Southern gentleman that's really trying in his relationship. He realizes there's problems. He's trying to like do the best he can.
It's a couple that isn't working that because he's got a lot of issues to work through, and
she has issues too, clearly cheating.
But yeah, so Judge Reinhold Theory, he comes into the bar and sees Johnny there and ends up paying for his drinks and stuff, but he's inviting Johnny to dinner. He wants Johnny to come to dinner because Theory's mother or grandmother, that part was unclear, has a secret man in her life.
which we're supposed to care about.
Which I guess, yeah, who's been kind of following her since her husband died or whatever. And so he wants to have that dinner, and he wants his best buddy, who's been back in his life for 45 minutes, to be there for this dinner.
And fucking his girlfriend for 40, or his wife for 43 of those 45 minutes.
But he doesn't know that yet.
Yeah, that's true.
And Johnny can bring his date, who is Marisa Tomei, randomly for no seeming reason.
Yeah, and she was delightful in this scene, honestly. She was great.
Love her, though.
I wish she had been a bigger role in the movie.
So that scene, the dinner scene, if I can jump ahead to the dinner scene, is so weird for me personally, because I am a really big fan of Seinfeld. And half of the people at that table were in Seinfeld, and it's super odd. And that whole scene is very strange because we're introduced to two brand new characters. We're like, how far are we into the movie at this point? Halfway through?
Yeah, I would say 50-60% of the way through.
Right? We're introduced to two brand new characters at this point, one of which we never see again.
Right.
And then at the same time, Johnny and Zandalee are doing it in the other room while they're all at dinner, just sitting in the dining room.
Yeah, like these two just happen to slip away from the dinner. And
then 20 minutes?
They decide to fuck on a washer, but then she turns the washer on.
Yeah, I rolled my eyes at that,
to get the extra vibration, I guess. I don't really know. But
I was like, nobody's noticing any of this?
Yeah, they're like, well, okay, so I think at one point, Judge Reinhold's character yells something out about for them to come back in, and Nick Cage's character says that they're just washing up. And then they turn on the washing machine.
It was before the sex.
Well, that was like while things were starting to get steamy. But then randomly, like, okay, so just picture this from Judge Reinhold's character's point of view. Is you're sitting at dinner, these two slip away. You hear like some weird crashing around in the kitchen. And then you ask them when they're coming back. And one of them says they're washing up. And then you hear the washing machine turn on.
God, it's so bad.
How exactly are you washing? Like, what are you washing up? Like, anyway. He clearly knows at this point what's going on.
Well, because they keep cutting back and forth to him looking around kind of like uncomfortably.
Yes. And then I wrote for my next note is finger poetry. I don't think it was at this dinner scene, but I think in a scene after this one that Zandalee and Johnny Collins are talking, Nick Cage's character, and she says that she loves his poetry, and he immediately starts banging her and says, what about finger poetry or something along those lines.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And
yeah, he's not
just such a weird thing to say. And yeah, I'm sorry for how explicit I am about this, but you can't really talk about this movie without being explicit because it legitimately is a pornographic movie.
Yeah, it's 80% sex.
Yes. And so you cannot be subtle talking about this movie. So then while she's getting finger blasted, it cuts to Judge Reinhold, and he's like coming out of the shower looking for her. I think they were at his house or something I can't remember exactly, but he comes out and his towel coming out of the shower is like above his belly button. It's like the least sexy place for a man to have his towel. It's like not low enough to be like intriguing, but it's not like he's covering his nipples. It's just a weird place in the middle. So my next note was, why is this towel so high? Because you never in movies see a man with their towel above their belly button. Like, you're showing everything else in this movie. The belly button is too much. Like, what was going? Or they were scared it was going to slip down. I don't know, but
he's sensitive about his belly button.
Maybe, and I'm sorry if that's the case. But it was a weird thing. Then we get another Nick Cage sex scene.
Should we have been keeping a tally?
I mean, that's only the second one, I think.
Is it? Is that it? It feels like
so.
More.
And this, okay, so they start to have sex. And then they stop. And she starts getting emotional. I don't recall what it was about. Because there's a lot of emotions throughout this whole movie. None by the viewer, all by people that we're supposed to feel an emotion for. And she moves and sits on the couch, full bush and boobs out, of course, because that's
the movie.
That's her only costume in this movie. And then Nick Cage's character comes over and kind of like ducks down in front of frame. And for a split second, I'm pretty sure you see some pendulum ball sack there.
I missed it.
I'm pretty sure. My next note was I think I saw Nick Ballsack.
You didn't freeze frame it?
I did not freeze frame it because I did not want to remember most things in this movie. So then he talks to her and she starts seeming like she's feeling better. And he has some cocaine on the table next to them and starts pouring olive oil next to it. She specifically says, "I'm not doing drugs." And then he runs his finger through the cocaine and olive oil and jams it inside of her.
Well, because then he says, "I'm not asking you to."
Yes.
And I that line, see, and again, it's not understanding the movie, right? Is that line supposed to be that he's not giving her the choice?
I mean, that's the only way I feel like you could interpret
right?
it.
Like that's what that like. So that's a problem.
And it's unclear where the finger's going, but either way, the cocaine is going to take effect.
And it seemingly does because her mood shifts.
Yes, it does. So my next note was, is he giving her non-consensual vaginal drugs?
I mean, I think the answer is yes.
It was unclear what orifice it was, but yes, one of the couple of choices down there, non-consensually. And then we get a scene where she's in the store again with Jerry, and then they're talking, and then she just randomly walks away from the store, seemingly while it's open. She doesn't close the door or anything. She just walks away.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's another reference that I caught in this movie that it was not really a reference because this movie was made way before any of these other movies. It's just kind of interesting, like precursor to other things in other movies. He's eating a peach.
Yeah, he's eating a peach.
Very seductively.
Yes.
And if you remember another famous line from Nick Cage, I think it was from Face Off. Another Face Off reference. He says something like, "I could eat a peach for hours." And it's like one of the famous lines from that movie. But yes, maybe I'm reading too much into these. It's just funny to
because
see.
I think so this is the scene where Terry calls Johnny into his office at work.
Yeah.
And Johnny's on lunch. And so he's eating this peach and there's all this not sexual tension. There's all this tension about the sexual relationship that Zandalee is having because Terry knows about something.
Yeah.
Right. And, he's playing it off like he doesn't really know who it is. I think he knows at this point that it's Johnny.
Yeah.
Or at least suspects that it's Johnny. And Johnny's eating this peach the whole time. And I think it's supposed to be very metaphorically exactly what it looks like.
Right in front of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. It's just
a little heavy-handed.
Like, it's just funny that, it seems like, I guess Face Off took a lot from this movie based on what I'm getting. Probably more than I even noticed. I haven't watched Face Off in a long time, so there might be more. But I would love to ask Mr. Cage, our one true God, if he remembered this movie at that point and was taking things from this movie and putting it into his character in Face Off. Because I feel like there's definitely too many coincidences for it to be not the case. But maybe on our final episode we'll interview Mr. Cage and Derrick's going to set that up. So and then so I think at this point Zandalee goes to his apartment, is like waiting around for him. He doesn't come home after work because he got fired, I think. Or did he get fired? I can't remember exactly what happened, but he had a big blowout at work over this thing, but the Judge Reinhold scene that we were just talking about. And she gets angry and starts kicking stuff around his apartment or whatever.
So I guess what's been happening is they've been doing it over lunch, and he couldn't get there over lunch because he had this meeting with Theory. And so she tears up his place. He thinks she's upset because he stood her up because he missed their little lunch rendezvous.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And so she throws paint on his bed at some point.
I mean, she does a lot, right? She destroys his answering machine. She flips over a couple different tables.
Yeah, another girl calls and says she misses him, and she hears that on the answering machine, and then she tears it up. That's what ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back,
Right.
so to speak. So yeah, she throws paint on his bed, which does come back later, because the paint that she threw on the bed was like a single line, like she threw a paint can out. But then when they show the bed later, it's like splattered all over the bed. So there's a weird continuity error there. But then we get a scene with Judge Reinhold's character, Theory, or however you say his name, singing on a public bus.
Yeah.
Randomly.
Because he's starting to crack.
Oh, right? He's cracked at this point.
He's having a lot of personal problems. He knows his wife's having an affair. He's pretty sure it's with his childhood best friend, and they're trying to push him out of his dad's company. Things are going downhill.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's a long scene of him singing on this bus, and a couple of people just like giving him weird looks the whole time. So that's really great. And then we get a scene with Zandalee in church again, and Johnny Collins shows up. Johnny, Nick Cage's character, shows up in the church and sits down next to her, and they have a conversation. How'd you find me? Blah, 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 whatever. And then he lights up a cigarette in this church.
In the church.
Starts smoking. There's a lot of smoking in this movie, by the way. Like, people talk a lot about, like, the smoking in 80s and 90s movies. And, like, all the bad boys, like, hero type people did it. But it was gratuitous in this movie. Like, everyone was smoking almost all the time, whether it was cigars or marijuana or cigarettes.
I mean, to be fair, everything is gratuitous in this movie.
That's true. But yeah, so he lights up in church, and then he starts trying to kiss her, and she says, no, not here, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically pushes her into like a confession booth and seemingly rapes her. I mean, it did not look consensual at all. And then at the end, he says, thank you, Father. And listen, like, there's things to like about this movie if you like bad movies in general, but the main relationship that they're trying to push in this movie is so confusing potentially because of the weird vibes between the two people involved. I don't know, but it seems like it's consensual, and then other times it seems like it's just straight up rape, and like she keeps going back to her abuser. I don't think that's how the story was meant, but that's what it felt like. But
it is really hard to know what this was supposed to be. I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from it, because even like the generic plot of it sounded more like the three of them had like a deal with each other because Theory couldn't do it, so they get his buddy Johnny to help out. It was going to be kind of like that, but they're doing it behind Theory's back, and then there's just the chemistry between Johnny and Zandalee is non-existent. It was just very, very weird.
Yeah, it was a lot. And yeah, if you're basing your whole movie around this, then it has to work.
Right. Yep.
So, that was tough throughout this whole movie for me. I don't think it was intended to be that way, like I said, but the fact that you also got these vibes means that it's not like it's just me reading too much into things.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get the thank you, Father line, which is a weird thing to say after what seemed to be a rape. But at this point, he's seemingly forced her to have sex with him like 20 feet from her husband, and now forced her to have sex with him in a church when she said no, and forced her to do drugs that she did not consent to. So yeah, then she goes to the father or the mother or grandmother, unclear person's place, and she's playing Scrabble against her secret love. And there's like a weird like advice scene from this person.
Yep.
While they're playing Scrabble. Yeah. And then my next note is just so much smoking, because eventually it got to the point where I was like, wow, they're really like emphasizing the smoking. Um, my next note is she gets a lot of action. Did she kiss somebody else at this point?
Not that I recall.
I don't remember what that was about. But this is, I think, around the time when it showed that she's like, we should take a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go out on a boat and they like
Well, because
show,
she basically tells Johnny she's done with him
yeah,
because she's going to double down on her marriage and try and fix things.
right. And, kudos to her for that, although she's, done a lot at this point. Um, but yeah, so they get on a boat and then they go to like this marina and Johnny's randomly there.
Well, so I think there's a scene before they leave where Theory sees Johnny in the bar again and tells Johnny that he and his wife are going to go away on a little trip, and that he's going to take him to the place they used to go to when they were kids. That at that point, I think that solidifies to the audience that Theory knows it's Johnny.
Yeah, and that he wants him to show up.
Exactly.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So yeah, so they're on the boat and they're driving around. They go to like one of these little like bar dock type situations where the boats
Marina.
park. Is that big enough to be considered a marina?
I feel like, yeah, in the early 90s, probably. It was
Okay.
like, yeah, they sold fishing bait and food and stuff like that
Fair
in the
enough.
area. So then they started talking about catfish, and Nick Cage's character chimes up and says he needs chicken blood because that's what you catch catfish on. And as somebody who's done a lot of catfishing in my life, I can say with 100% certainty that Nick Cage is giving good advice here. That somebody on that set had been catfishing before, because chicken blood does do well. And so they talk about the stink bait that he brewed up this morning. And yeah, if you've ever been around stink bait, like, catfish love that crap, but it is disgusting. But yeah, chicken blood is a common ingredient in stink bait. So
the more you know.
Yeah, kudos to whoever did the fishing research in this movie. I actually wouldn't be surprised if it was like Nick Cage just randomly knew. Like, they didn't even have that in the script, and he's like, "Oh, chicken blood, yeah."
God. Well, yeah. So he speaks up, and Theory's like, "What took you so long?" Hey, Zandy's here. Let's all go hang out.
Yeah, let's have a three-way. That's what I thought they were setting up at this point.
Oh no! So at this point, I was like, okay, he's gonna shoot Johnny. I really thought that he was gonna kill Johnny, and I wasn't too far off. I was pretty proud of myself.
No, so then they both go out to the dock, and we get what
She's
be
pissed.
The most awkward dance scene, the most awkward and most out of place dance scene I've ever seen in a movie.
Okay, so that's the second scene I was talking about, where like characters are dancing and it's unclear if they hear music.
And it's unclear whether they like each other or want to kill each other at this point. We know one of them wants to kill the other one for sure, but we didn't really know that it was the other way around.
I kept waiting I thought that Theory was going to like pull out a knife and like stab Johnny in the back or something like that.
It did seem like that. Yeah, that would have been a little on the nose too.
Well, fine.
But like, yeah, it's like I think Judge Reinhold asks Zandalee if she wants to dance, and she says no because she's pissed, and then instead he dances with Johnny, and it's this like really awkward, like seemingly formal Southern dance that they both know, and it's done very aggressively, which I feel like is not the way that it's supposed to be done, but based on the character of Johnny, which we've seen him do almost everything in this movie aggressively, it was fitting. But it was unclear as to whether like these guys that's how they did it when they were kids, when they danced, or if this was like they knew that the other one hated the other, that they hated each other and weren't friends at this point and something was going on.
I think once the three of them are standing on the dock, they all know that this is going to end. How exactly, they're unsure, but like, this is it. They know it's the climax of the situation.
So, yeah. Then on my next note is it's still going on and then finally over, because it's long. It's like 2.5 minutes of these two guys dancing, and you don't really know why they're dancing. Like, what's the
very
context?
Tense. It really ratcheted up the tension.
Yeah.
Arguably, this was the most emotionally clear-cut scene for me. Like, sure. I understood what was the emotional state of everybody in this moment. Whereas in a lot of the rest of the movie, it was unclear.
Yeah.
This felt the most on point.
Next I have Will This Got Dark, because at this point, Johnny's saying something to him, to Judge Reinhold's character, and he pulls a gun, like the world's smallest gun, out
Yeah,
of his
Theory
pocket.
pulls out a little pistol.
Yeah, and points it at
Everybody. He
John.
points it at all
That's
three of
true.
them.
And so he kind of coerces them onto the boat after he shot. I think he fired a bullet at this point.
Yeah, he shoots off into the distance somewhere. So hopefully there's not some poor fisherman on the other side.
or like a bird. He just killed like a random seagull.
Right? Like
so then we get this scene where like they're speeding really fast in this boat, and
yep, through the
bayou, and Johnny says like we're supposed to be going the other direction to get to our fishing spot or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, no, it's this way. And so
Theory is like totally snapped.
I had written down here, this cinematography is next level, because, and this is remember when I talked about at the very beginning, where it's unclear as to whether like they know that they're being filmed, or like this is like actual, movie cinematography, because it's literally, you can 100% tell that it's just a couple of people in another boat behind them filming, and like there's no attempt to steady the camera or do anything. It's meant to feel like you're also on a boat following them. So that was confusing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, cinematography is next level. And then they stop.
So what happens is Johnny takes over.
That's right. I had a note about hitting Zandalee, because I think Judge Reinhold's character hits Zandalee at this point.
They've both hit her at some point during the movie.
Yeah,
I forget exactly when it happens. But
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But
yeah, no, you're good.
Over.
Yeah. So Johnny's driving the boat now, and it's again another unclear moment. It feels like it was on purpose to knock Theory off the boat and into the water.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Zandalee goes to try and save him, and then Johnny goes to try to save him, and Theory doesn't want to be saved. He even goes so far as to bite a chunk out of Johnny's neck.
Okay, so this is where it gets unclear, right? Because so we see him fly out of the boat, and there's like probably a minute of just like other characters staring at the spot where he went down. And then some bubbles come up. Mm-hmm. A lot of bubbles come up, as if he drowned.
Right.
And then Johnny goes into the water. And this is the actual sequence that happens in the movie. Johnny goes into the water to try and get him.
Well, Zandy goes first.
He goes first. You can't get to him. So Johnny goes. And this is after all the bubbles already came up.
Right.
So you're pretty sure he's dead at this point. So Nick Cage's character, Johnny, goes down into the water and comes back up a little bit later carrying Terry or however Theory,
yeah,
and carrying him up, right? But at this point, you think he's dead, and then when they get to the surface, Theory bites a chunk out of Nick Cage's neck,
yeah,
and then sinks again, which is not how the human body works. And so I don't know if we're supposed to believe that he did that while he was dead, or if like he was still alive and they just like let him go and let him drown. Like,
well, yes, I think it's the latter, because at the end of the movie, when she's at the cemetery and our good boy Steve Buscemi shows back up again, she says like, how they said that he drowned, but how can you drown if you know how to swim?
That's true. And
right?
That's my next note, is the trash guy is begging at cemeteries now.
Yeah, I don't know. Like he escapes a couple of times. I mean, like clearly this dude probably shouldn't be out of the prison at this point. Like he steals a TV at some point. Like I don't know what he's doing, but
he gets caught stealing the TV. So
right, he's already in jail. He's out doing garbage duty. He steals a TV, gets caught again, and is somehow back at the cemetery out begging. Again. Like lock this dude down.
Yeah. And so then we get an F-bomb drop, and I'm not talking about fuck, because I will say that on this show. We get another F word that's a derogatory word towards a specific LGBTQ group that I don't like. I don't even remember who said it in the movie. I think it wasn't Steve Buscemi's character. It's not important now. Really. It's not important. But yeah, it was a weird thing to throw in this movie. If like it's already a bad movie, to make that kind of made it worse. Like, why did you have to drop that, 90% of the way into the movie?
Yeah, I mean, the movie's almost over at this point. It's just, yeah, they just kind of double down.
Yeah. And my next note is that escalated quickly, paints himself. I'm not sure what that was in reference to. I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
so Johnny, so this is afterwards. So Thery's died off screen and they're all back home. And somehow nobody, I guess, has been questioned by police or arrested or anything in the death of this guy.
Even though the guy has literally bite marks in his neck.
Right? Nobody seems to care. Or they just skip over it, whatever. And Johnny's response is to like totally snap. And yeah, he just destroys his studio. He's throwing paint everywhere. He's covering himself in black.
Oh, yes.
Because he's like, black it out, black it all out.
He literally, this is an extended scene of him just taking a can of black paint and dumping it all over himself.
Yep.
It is a really weird scene, and I'm pretty sure this had to have been like an improvised thing by Nick Cage. I feel like it did not.
I'm
feel
sure
like
the direction was like freak
crazy.
out and throw paint around,
But then he literally like covered himself in black paint. It was so uncomfortable to watch, but like what a creative, bold move by Nick to go that route with it. It was very odd. Yeah, you saying that definitely jogged because I 100% remember that was a weird thing to do. And that took forever to clean up too.
Well, it's fine because in the next scene, he's totally cleaned up as if it never happened.
Right. And he tells her that when he smells toast, he's reminded of her skin.
Yes.
Which is a very serial killer-y thing to say. Why does her skin smell like toast to you? Are you having a stroke? Like,
when I go in my kitchen to make toast, I smell your skin. I can't get you out of me.
Yeah. What a weird thing to say.
Another uncomfortable line.
And then we get another Nick Cage sex scene almost. I put Nick Cage sex scene almost, so I feel like it started to look like it was going to be a sex scene, and then it stopped.
Right, so they're back at the house that Zandy used to share with Thery, and she kind of stops it because she doesn't want to do it.
Yeah. And then I have these people need therapy. That's my next note.
For sure. Understatement.
Which is like, very light compared to what they really need. And then I don't remember this very well either, so maybe you'll remind me. Taking dead body to church.
Right. So at the end of the movie, she is like walking down the street. Again, another movie where people just walk aimlessly down the middle of roads when there are clear sidewalks available, but whatever. And Johnny's following Zandalee at this point. It's unclear if she knows that he's following, but I can't imagine she doesn't know, but she's ignoring him. Let's go with that. And then they're reaching the church. So seemingly she's going to church like she has the couple of times we had seen already. And this guy that we've seen his car around, 2 or 3 times, pulls back up and is like, "Hey, Johnny, remember to pay your accounts receivable," or whatever, which I guess he owes drug money, which he's got a job and he's a painter and he still owes drug money. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, it's really not established at this point in the movie. I do remember it now that you're bringing it up. Yeah.
And so this guy goes to seemingly shoot Johnny, and Zandy sees this as an opportunity, I think, to end things. And so she jumps in front of
She commits
Johnny.
Suicide, essentially.
She basically commits suicide, yeah.
To get Johnny out of her life.
Really upset. And he picks up her body and walks towards the church, and that's the end of the movie.
Yeah, we don't see him actually go into the church or anything else. Yeah. And honestly, I thought this was going to be another movie where Nick Cage died at the end of the movie because that seems to be a trend. But nope, I was surprised. It was Zan.
Yep. That's it. That's the end of the movie.
Yeah, my last note is, okay, I guess that's it. Because I did not expect it to end, which is another common theme in our Nick Cage movies, is that they end in a place that I did not expect them to end. So,
yeah, I mean, when this movie started, I did not expect 2 of the 3 main characters to be dead, both by suicide.
Right.
By the end of this freaking movie.
I mean, I was borderline at the end of this movie. Honestly, I was like, "What the fuck? Maybe I don't deserve to live for watching this."
Oh man, don't joke about that. But
it's not a very. Sorry, I didn't. Yeah. That. But yeah, it was
This is a bad movie.
It was not a good movie.
Okay, I'm not saying that no one's allowed to enjoy it, but it is uncomfortable. It is bizarre. It is,
but I think that's what people like. A lot of people like weird ass bizarre movies, just like that don't make any sense. And we're trying to be critical of movie. We talk, I guess we're not trying to be critical, but we do talk about things we like, don't like, things that don't make sense. We are critical of movies here. So, I can understand, us not liking it, but why somebody else would like it. There's a lot of other things like in Mandy that I didn't necessarily like.
Yeah, I think my problem with this though is that the core concept of the movie is a relationship that does not appear to be consensual and actively appears to not be consensual throughout the majority of the film. And so it's aggressive, it's uncomfortable, it's there's no consent, there's just bitter kind of hatred. I guess I just if you what is it that people are enjoying in the movie would be my question. If it's the nudity and the sex, there's other places you could go to watch that without the bad stuff going on in this movie.
Yeah.
That would be my take.
Well, I think that if that's what you're watching this movie for, then it's potentially the problematic nature that would appeal to the person, because there is a whole like line of consensual non-consent. Like that's from what I understand, a very common kink, and people may find the way to indulge that in this movie. But again, there's a lot of places you can find that kind of thing that I don't know. It was a weird movie. I don't really want to get into
That's fair.
Kink discussion, but it's a weird movie, and I would wonder too what exactly people loved about it. And I'm assuming that if you say you love this movie, maybe it's just because that you think that makes people think you're quirky or something, when in reality it just makes me worry about you. Yeah.
Yep.
It's about the nicest thing I can say.
Well, then I think we can just go ahead and rate the movie at this point, and we can all move on to other things.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So for those who don't know, we rate our Nicolas Cage movies on two different 20-point scales. We have an overall quality score, 1 being the worst movie of all time, 20 being the best movie. We also have caginess, 20 being the most cagey movie you can think of, and 1 being the least cagey movie you can think of. So I'm going to kick things off this time. I usually kick it over to you first.
Sure.
I'm going to kick things off on this. And we're going to start with quality. We do quality first. And I am going to give this a 1 because I think it's truly terrible.
Yeah. What's the lowest movie we have on there so far?
So the lowest we have right now
for
quality is we gave, let's see, Rage. You gave it a 4. I gave it a 3. Inconceivable, you gave it a 4 and I gave it a 6. Those would be our bottom 2.
Man, Rage was pretty bad.
I'd rather watch Rage. Because Rage was coherent. It was bad, but I get it. I knew what the people were feeling. I know if the people liked or disliked each other.
Right. I mean, I definitely think it's probably worse than Rage. I don't know if it's a 1 for me. I think that some of the concepts, whether they were intentional or not, were interesting. Like the idea that the way this was filmed made it feel like you were watching a stage play, essentially. The fact that every scene was like, some of them were really amazing, like Nick Cage covering himself in paint and like destroying it. Like that was a really interesting scene and probably one of the most sincere feeling scenes in the movie for the character.
Yeah.
But then you also have scenes like the scene where they're talking about him quitting writing, where it's just so poorly acted and you feel like you're just watching like a community college production.
It was like they were still rehearsing.
Right. And I'm not to knock community college productions. It's just more of a generic, like, low level acting from people that weren't low level actors necessarily at this time. So I feel like for me, it'd be a 2 or a 3.
You got to pick.
Yeah. I'm going to go with a 3 because I think that there were things that I could see why people would like it. I didn't particularly like those things. I did find some of it interesting. But yeah, I would probably rather watch Rage or Inconceivable than this movie again.
Okay. Now, what about our caginess?
I mean, I think that's going to be higher for sure.
Yes.
I don't think you would debate me on that. Like from the intro for the character to that paint scene to like the eating the peach scene, I think he took a lot of risks in this movie.
Yeah.
With the character, and it's unclear whether a lot of these. You hear the stories about Nick Cage and him talking about the things he was trying with a character, and so you assume that when a director brings him on, that they're bringing him on because he'll have some of these kind of oddball ideas that will make this movie stand out. But was that the case in 1991 or whenever this came out? It's hard to say. It's like a lot of these things that I think are very cagey, but were those even necessarily a Cage thing? Was that something that the director told him to do?
Right. Right.
Based on the movies that we've seen of his, I feel like a lot of them were the Cage. Like at this point, he had really only done a few projects. He wasn't like a super big name at this point. Raising Arizona and Moonstruck were basically his two biggest movies. I guess he did Vampire Skips before this also. So I don't know. I feel like at this point, these were actual true Cage things that he injected into the movie. I know I'm kind of rambling here.
A little bit. With
some of these early movies, it's hard to know whether it was something that like the director asked for or something he just brought into the character, because he wasn't really established very well at this point. But I would say that based on the fact that the previous movies he'd done before this, I'd probably give it like a 12 or 13, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Is that around where you were at?
Yeah, I was actually going to give it a 13.
Okay, yeah, let's stick with 13 then.
Okay, yeah, so there we go. So a 13 on caginess and an average of a 2 on overall quality, with Ryan giving it a 3 and me giving it a 1. So now, of course, we have our wheel O Cage that determines what movie we're going to watch next, and we have to add a movie to that wheel to replace Zandalee. So I've got a little random generator here that is going to pick the movie that will join the wheel. So joining the wheel, I think, Ryan, you'll be excited about the possibility of this coming up. Teen Titans Go to the Movie.
Yes, I've been trying to get you to watch this movie forever.
So there you go. So the Teen Titans Go to the Movies will
where he famously voiced Superman after briefly being cast in the role in a failed Tim Burton Superman movie.
That's right. So that's going to join the wheel O Cage. So you'll have to follow us to find out what movie gets spun on the Wheel of Cage. You can go to comingofcage.com or follow us at Coming of Cage on Twitter and Facebook. You can watch Ryan and I spin our wheel, and you can catch our Cage-O-meter, where we rank all of the Nicolas Cage movies that we have reviewed to date. This was our 13th movie, so you'll be able to see where that lands along with the other dozen that we've talked about. This has been Zandalee. Ryan, any final thoughts?
No, I think we've covered most everything, sadly, about this movie. I feel a little dirty having done that, but
yeah, me too. Me too. I'm glad this one's behind us, and I look forward to the next one. I hope you enjoyed listening to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Let us know your thoughts if you've seen Zandalee. I'm Derek. That's Ryan. We're the Coming of Cage podcast. We'll catch you next time.